The forest was silent. Only the wind moved through the trees, rattling branches like bones. Roman soldiers picked their way through the undergrowth, their sandals sinking into black mud. The air smelled of rot, of damp earth, of something fouler, death lingering even years after the slaughter. Then they saw it. Skulls nailed to tree trunks, their empty sockets staring forever into the woods. Broken shields hanging like trophies, rusted swords left to corrode in the rain. Armor scattered in the dirt, half buried by moss and roots. And bones, everywhere, bones. Piles of them whitening in the sun. Men who had once marched under the eagles of Rome, now picked apart by wolves and crows. Some had been sacrificed, their corpses twisted into grotesque displays by Germanic priests. Others had been left where they fell, cut down in the mud, never buried, never honored. The legionaries walking this cursed ground were not fighting a battle. They were walking among ghosts. This was Teutoburg, the place where Rome had lost everything, the place Rome had sworn to avenge. Act 1. The Nightmare of Teutoburg. Varus's Folly. The disaster began in 9 CE under the command of Publius Quintilius Varus, governor of Germania. Varus was no fool in politics, but he was no soldier either. He believed Germania was pacified, its tribes cowed, its people loyal. He believed a lie. At his side was Arminius, a Germanic noble raised in Rome, a supposed ally, even a citizen. Rome trusted him, Varus trusted him, but Arminius had not forgotten who he was. In secret, he united the Germanic tribes, preparing the trap that would become Rome's nightmare. The march into death. Varus marched with 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, nearly 20,000 men, plus cavalry and civilians. They carried families, merchants, slaves, baggage trains. They were not expecting war. Then came the message. A local revolt, Arminius urged. Varus must march to put it down. And so he turned his legions into the thick, tangled forests of Teutoburg. The trees closed in, rain poured down, the roads turned to rivers of mud. Legionary columns stretched long and vulnerable, their shields heavy with water, their supplies bogged in the mire. And then, from the shadows, the Germans struck. Arrows whistled, spears flew, and German war cry shattered the rain. The Romans stumbled in shock as warriors surged from the trees, slashing, stabbing, hurling javelins from every direction. The legionaries tried to form ranks, but the forest crushed them. Shields could not lock, cavalry could not maneuver, discipline dissolved in chaos. For 3 days the slaughter dragged on. The Germans built barricades, funneled the Romans into traps, cut them down by the hundreds. Panic spread, supplies were abandoned, wounded men were left behind. Varus himself, wounded and despairing, fell on his own sword rather than face capture. Officers followed, ending their lives with Roman dignity while their men screamed around them. By the 4th day, the legions ceased to exist. 20,000 Romans lay dead, their bodies stripped and mutilated, their eagles, the sacred standards of Rome, torn from their grasp and carried away in triumph. The aftermath. It was not just a defeat, it was annihilation. Few survivors ever made it back to Roman lines. Most were captured, enslaved, or sacrificed to Germanic gods. Some were burned alive, others drowned in bogs, others enslaved until death. The news reached Rome like a thunderclap. The empire was stunned. The Emperor Augustus, old and weary, tore his robes when he heard. For months he beat his head against the wall and cried out, "Quintilius Varus, give me back my legions!" The names of the 17th, 18th, and 19th were struck from the rolls of the legions, never to be reformed, a mark of shame branded into Roman history. Rome had suffered defeats before. Hannibal had crushed armies at Trebia, Tresinae, and Cannae. But this was different. This was betrayal. This was humiliation. This was Roman soldiers nailed to trees in foreign forests, their sacred eagles in enemy hands. Rome could not let it stand. But vengeance would take time. At Teutoburg, Rome lost not just men, but honor. The empire staggered. The world whispered of Rome's weakness. And in the years to come, Rome would answer, not with words, but with blood and fire.
Act 2. Rome prepares its revenge. A wound that would not heal. The forests of Germania had swallowed 3 legions whole, but the memory of Teutoburg was not buried with them. For years, Rome lived with the shame. Every family who lost a son, every senator who remembered Augustus's grief, carried the scar. But Rome had patience. Rome endured, and Rome waited for the moment to strike back. That moment came with Germanicus. Germanicus, Rome's avenger. Germanicus Julius Caesar, adopted son of Tiberius and great-nephew of Augustus, was everything the Roman people admired. Handsome, charismatic, beloved by the legions, he carried the name Caesar and the burden of Rome's revenge. In 14 CE, when Augustus died and Tiberius became emperor, Germania erupted again. Tribes rose in rebellion, and Germanicus was sent north with an army, not merely to restore order, but to settle an old score. This was not a war of conquest. It was a war of vengeance. The army of retribution. Germanicus gathered a massive force, 8 legions, cavalry, auxiliaries, and even fleets of ships to move supplies along the rivers. Nearly 80,000 men marched with him. This was not a cautious frontier force. It was Rome at full strength, carrying the wrath of the empire into the forests. The soldiers knew why they marched. They remembered Teutoburg. Many had kin who had vanished there, their bones left to rot in the mud. The banners of the lost legions had to be recovered, the shame erased. But this was only the beginning. The battlefield of ghosts. In 15 CE, Germanicus returned to the site of Teutoburg itself. The soldiers moved cautiously through the same forests where Varus's men had died. They found the earth still littered with weapons, armor, and bones. Skulls grinned from tree trunks where they had been nailed as offerings. Skeletons lay in chains, reminders of captives sacrificed to Germanic gods. The legionaries wept at the sight. Many cut locks of hair. Others raised their arms to the sky in grief. Germanicus himself ordered burials. Mass graves were dug, remains gathered, prayers whispered. Sacrifices were offered to appease the spirits of the dead. It was not only vengeance, it was mourning. Rome finally giving its fallen sons the dignity denied them years before. But grief quickly turned back to rage. In the campaigns of 16 CE, Germanicus sought not just raids, but open battle. He wanted to crush Arminius and the Germanic tribes once and for all. At the Battle of Itastaviso, along the Weser River, Germanicus met Arminius's forces head-on. The clash was brutal, spears, arrows, swords hacking through shield walls. The Germans fought ferociously, but Roman discipline and numbers carried the day. The battlefield was left carpeted with Germanic dead. Not long after, at the young Raverian Wall, the tribes made their last stand behind earthenworks. Again the legions stormed them, again the slaughter was merciless. Thousands were cut down, their defenses trampled under Roman feet. These were not just victories, they were massacres. Germanicus's legions hunted the fleeing, cut down the wounded, filled the rivers with corpses. Germania itself was set ablaze. Vengeance, not conquest. And yet, even in victory, Germania could not be fully subdued. The forests were endless, the tribes scattered, their resistance impossible to extinguish entirely. But Rome did not need conquest. It needed revenge. The lost eagles were recovered. The tribes who had celebrated Teutoburg were broken and slaughtered. The ground that had shamed Rome now ran with Germanic blood. Germanicus had answered Teutoburg with fire and iron. The legions of Varus had died screaming in the forest. Germanicus had made their killers pay. But the most haunting moment was still to come, when Rome returned to the bones of the fallen, and the avenger of the legions stood among the ashes of betrayal.
Act 3. The return to Teutoburg. The forest was still heavy with ghosts. In 16 CE, Germanicus led his legions back to the site where Varus and his men had fallen 7 years earlier. The place was a graveyard without tombstone, buried in moss. Skeletons still chained where they had been sacrificed to Germanic gods. Bones piled in heaps, some gnawed by beasts, others nailed to trees. The legionaries who marched with Germanicus stopped in silence. Many wept. Some pressed their hands to their faces, unwilling to look. Others clenched their fists, swearing vengeance all over again. Germanicus himself walked among the dead, his cloak dragging through the mud. Here, he thought, a consul had fallen. There, an eagle standard had been torn away. All around him were the unburied, the dishonored, men who had once carried the pride of Rome. He ordered funerals. Trenches were dug, bodies gathered, prayers spoken. Sacrifices were made to Jupiter and Mars, gods of Rome, to cleanse the ground of its shame. As the pyres burned, smoke rose through the canopy, carrying the souls of the dead toward the sky. It was not enough to heal the wound, but it gave dignity back to the fallen. Rome had not forgotten them. The last battles of vengeance. Soon after, Germanicus launched his final campaigns. The tribes were hunted down, their fields burned, their villages sacked. Roman steel left nothing untouched. At Idus Taviso, Rome's legions clashed again with Arminius and his allies. For hours, the battle raged, shield walls breaking, cavalry sweeping through, rivers of blood staining the grass. When it ended, the ground was littered with corpses, Germanic bodies piled high. At the Angevarian Wall, the Germans built earthworks for a last stand. Germanicus ordered them stormed. The legions surged forward, scaling walls, cutting down defenders with relentless fury. The earth itself seemed to tremble beneath the slaughter. The rivers of Germania ran red that year. Rome had recovered 2 of the lost eagles, broken the tribes that had mocked it, and left behind fields of ash. Act 4. The Ashes of Faith. And yet, for all the victories, Germania was never truly conquered. The land was too vast, too wild, too filled with tribes that melted into forests when pressed.
To hold Germania would have meant endless blood and endless years. So Rome chose not to stay. Tiberius recalled Germanicus, fearing his popularity and ambition. The frontier would hold at the Rhine. Beyond it, Germania would remain untamed. But that was not failure. Rome's goal had never been conquest, it had been vengeance, and vengeance had been delivered. The tribes who had slaughtered Rome's legions now lay slaughtered themselves. The shame of Teutoburg was washed in blood. The eagles had been recovered. The spirits of the dead had been honored. Rome had shown the world its truth. The empire might bleed, but it never forgot, and it always returned with fire and iron. Epilogue: Rome's eternal lesson. For centuries, the story of Teutoburg and its aftermath echoed in Roman memory. The legions never forgot their brothers who died there, nor the man who avenged them. Germanicus became a legend, his name spoken with reverence by soldiers. Germania would never be a Roman province. The forests remained free, the tribes unconquered, but Rome had taken what mattered most: its honor. The bones in the forest were buried. The lost eagles were found. The oath of vengeance was fulfilled. Rome's vengeance was brutal, merciless, and incomplete, yet it proved the empire's resilience. Even in its darkest hours, Rome did not collapse. It struck back. Rome could be betrayed. Rome could be wounded. Rome could even lose 3 legions to the forests of Germania. But Rome could not be broken. And when its vengeance came, it came with fire.